If you love growing plants but feel like your soil is always working against you, this is for you. Maybe you grow in a small backyard, a kitchen garden, raised beds, containers on the patio, or even a mix of houseplants and outdoor crops. Maybe you are the kind of gardener who reads labels, buys fertilizers, waters faithfully, and still ends up staring at weak growth, tired leaves, and soil that feels more like dust than life. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. Let me ask you something. When you press your hands into your garden soil, what do you feel? Is it soft, rich, and alive? Or is it dry, tight, and stubborn? Have you ever spent money on bag after bag of plant food, hoping this season would finally be different, only to get the same disappointing results? After many years of working with gardens, farm soil, compost, mulch, and natural fertility, I can tell you this with confidence. Most struggling soil is not simply hungry, it is lifeless. And that changes everything, because once you understand what living soil is actually asking for, you stop chasing quick fixes and start rebuilding the system that makes plants thrive on their own. Today, I'm going to show you a simple, low-cost formula made from everyday ingredients that can act like a biological signal in the soil. Under the right conditions, it can help draw earthworms back into your garden fast and begin waking the ground up from below. So if you are ready to spend less, grow smarter, and let nature do more of the heavy lifting, stay with me. To understand why so few gardeners have heard of this method, we need to go back to one pivotal year, 1939. In the story of soil, that year marks a major turning point. It was a time when people were still working with living earth, but the world was beginning to move toward chemical agriculture. In Brazil's Paraíba Valley, an agronomist named Helio Bra witnessed something remarkable. He watched local farmers apply a sweet fermented mixture to selected garden beds, and within hours, those beds were crowded with earthworms drawn in from the surrounding soil. Around the same time in North America, self-reliant communities were using biological methods of their own, later linked to names like the Eli Yoder secrets and the Amish wire method. Different places, same principle. When you feed the life in the soil feeds the crop. So why was knowledge this cheap and effective buried? Why did so many growers forget it? The answer lies in the years after World War II. Before the war, chemical fertilizers were uncommon and expensive. During the war, giant factories were built to produce ammonium nitrate for explosives. When the war ended, demand for munitions collapsed, but the factories remained. Chemical companies needed a new market, so those materials were repackaged as cheap nitrogen fertilizer for farmers. At the same time, products like DDT, once used in military settings, were promoted as miracle answers for agriculture. The industry understood a truth it could not profit from. Living soil does not create repeat customers. If your land is full of worms and able to renew itself, you need far fewer outside inputs. So older organic methods shaped over generations were pushed aside as backward in favor of fast chemical fixes that slowly weaken the earth. That is the secret buried beneath 1939. We did not abandon these methods because they failed. We abandoned them because convenience was easier to sell than self-sustaining fertility. And once you understand that, the next question becomes obvious. Why are earthworms so important that bringing them back can change your garden from the ground up? Before we reveal the formula, we need to answer one basic question. Why would any gardener want more earthworms? Most people think of worms as little creatures birds eat or bait for fishing, but anyone who has spent time building healthy soil knows they are far more than that. Earthworms are part of the hidden structure of a productive garden. A soil without worms is usually a soil in decline. It may still grow something for a while, but underneath it is often compacted, low in airflow, and weak in biological life. Worms act like nature's tiny plows. As they move through the ground, they create channels that carry oxygen and water into the root zone. Without those channels, soil hardens, roots struggle, and plants stop thriving. But their greatest gift is what happens after they feed. As worms consume decaying organic matter, they break it down and return it to the soil as worm castings, a rich form of humus. Those castings hold nutrients in forms that roots and microbes can use more easily. That means better nutrient cycling, better structure, and more stable fertility. This is why experienced growers pay attention when worm numbers rise. It is a sign that the soil food web is waking up. A garden with a healthy worm population can produce stronger growth and better harvests with far less dependence on chemical fertilizers, because the soil itself is doing more of the feeding work. The benefits are not only visible in plant vigor, they show up in flavor too. Fruits and vegetables grown in living, worm-rich soil often have better texture, longer keeping quality, and a deeper taste. If you have ever wondered why tomatoes from an old home garden tasted richer, part of the answer was below your feet. So when I say soil without worms is dead soil, I do not mean that as a dramatic line. I mean that worms are one of the clearest signs your garden is alive in building fertility from within. And once you understand their role, the next step becomes simple. How do we call them back? So how do we actually bring these remarkable creatures back into our garden? We do it by using what I call the 1939 protocol. And let's be clear from the start, this is not magic and it is not folklore. It is simple, elegant biochemistry working exactly the way nature intended. Earthworms respond to chemical signals in the soil around them. In the wild, they do not wander aimlessly looking for food. They locate promising areas by sensing the compounds released when organic matter begins to break down. That is the key to this whole method. When we pour this low-cost mixture into the soil, we are creating a biological beacon, a signal that mimics the rich scent of active decomposition and microbial abundance. The real secret is not the sweetness itself. The secret is speed. When we combine molasses, which provides complex carbohydrates and trace minerals, with dry yeast, which acts as a living catalyst, we trigger a fast fermentation process. As that reaction gets going, it produces warmth, alcohol, and most importantly, a rising plume of carbon dioxide, or CO2, moving through the soil profile, and soil life pays attention to that signal. Worms are highly sensitive to changes in their environment, especially when those changes suggest food, moisture, and biological activity. As the CO2 spreads outward from the treated area, it acts like a dinner bell below the surface. To a worm, that plume means one thing. Something rich is happening here. What happens next is where the system becomes so effective. First, the sugars feed the bacteria. The bacteria multiply rapidly, coating organic particles and softening material in the soil. Then the worms move in, attracted by both the gas signal and the burst of microbial life. We are not forcing them into the bed. We are giving them the exact conditions they are designed to seek out. And that is the beauty of this method, to attract the biggest builders in the soil. You begin by feeding the smallest. Now we come to the part everyone has been waiting for, the formula itself. This is the same style of mixture gardeners once used to wake up tired ground. With ingredients so simple, most people already have some version of them at home. And the best part is that it costs very little to make enough for a meaningful section of garden. Start with a 5-gallon bucket of clean water. If you are using tap water from the city, let it sit out uncovered overnight before you mix anything in. That one small step matters because chlorine can work against the very microbial activity we are trying to encourage. Once the water is ready, make sure it is lukewarm, ideally somewhere around 30 to 35 degrees C. Too hot, and you damage the living organisms. Too cold, and the reaction stays sluggish. Next, add 1 TSP of unsulfured blackstrap molasses for every liter of water. I prefer molasses over plain sugar because it does more than feed fermentation. It also brings minerals to the mix, elements like iron, potassium, and sulfur that support microbial enzyme activity and help sustain the reaction a little longer. Then add 1 TSP of dry baking yeast along with half a cup of raw sugar to the bucket. The sugar gives the microbes a fast burst of energy, and the yeast helps drive the fermentation forward. Together, they wake the mixture up quickly. If you want to strengthen the signal a little more, you can add a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar or a splash of cachaca. Some gardeners also mix in used coffee grounds, especially when they want a broader organic signal in the soil. The nitrogen and mild acidity can make the brew even more biologically attractive. Stir everything thoroughly until fully dissolved. Then let the bucket rest in a warm, shaded place for 1 to 2 hours. Soon you will notice a deep, earthy smell and a light foam forming on the surface. That foam is your sign that the mixture is active, alive, and ready to go into the garden. Now that the mixture is alive and active, application becomes everything. This is the stage where many gardeners get impatient and lose half the benefit. Never pour this brew onto the soil in the harsh heat of midday. Strong sun and excess heat can damage the delicate microbial activity we just worked to build. Instead, wait for the gentler hours of the day, late afternoon, early evening, or dawn, when the soil is cooler and the biology has a real chance to settle in and spread. Take your bubbling mixture and pour it directly into the soil around the root zone of your plants. That part matters. We are not feeding the leaves here, and we are not spraying for surface effect. We want this liquid to move downward into the earth, where the microbes, sugars, and fermentation signals can travel through the soil profile and begin calling life back in from below. And once you apply it, this is where patience takes over. In the first few hours, the surface may look unchanged. Do not let that fool you. Earthworms do their best work in darkness, below the light, below the surface, where the soil still holds moisture and calm. As evening comes on, the signal begins to move through the underground pathways. If you step outside a few hours after nightfall and shine a flashlight gently across the ground, you may notice the first signs: small movements, faint ripples, subtle shifts in the soil. That is not your imagination. That is the living workforce arriving. By the next morning, if you check carefully, you will often find far more worm activity than you had the day before. In badly damaged soil, it may take closer to 48 hours, but in an ordinary garden bed, 24 hours is often enough to see the difference. Just picture what that really means. A whole underground crew moving in, ready to loosen, feed, and rebuild your soil around the clock without a wage and without a complaint. But this is the point where good intentions can still go wrong. The mixture may bring the worms in, but attraction alone is not enough. If you want them to stay, your garden has to become a place they can actually live. The brew is the invitation. The habitat is what turns a visit into a permanent settlement. Once the worms arrive, your job is to protect the conditions they need most. Earthworms leave quickly when the soil becomes too hot, too dry, or too toxic. If the ground is bare, exposed, and treated with harsh chemicals, they will disappear just as fast as they came. That is why the next step is not optional. You need to cover the soil. Apply a generous layer of organic mulch, dry leaves, straw, bark, or wood chips. That mulch acts like a protective blanket over the garden bed. It shields the surface from heat, slows evaporation, keeps moisture where it belongs, and gives worms a safer, cooler environment to move through. With the molasses mixture drawing them in and the mulch creating a stable home, the population can begin to sustain itself instead of depending on repeated rescue. And once worms settle into a healthy bed, they do not just remain there. They multiply. They feed, mate, reproduce, and expand the living structure of the soil week after week. A small starting population can grow surprisingly fast when moisture, food, and shelter are all working together. There is one more rule I want you to take seriously. Stop deep tilling. When worms establish themselves, they spend days and weeks building channels through the soil that carry air, water, and life downward. One aggressive pass with a rototiller or hoe can destroy in seconds what took them so long to build. If you need to loosen the bed, use a garden fork and lift gently without turning the whole soil profile upside down. Let the worms do the plowing for you. That is what they were designed to do, and they do it better than any machine ever. Now, before we move into the deeper lesson behind all of this, there is one important warning I want to give you as someone who cares not just about growing plants, but about protecting the living balance of the soil. While 1939 points us back to forgotten agricultural wisdom, it also reminds us that not every underground visitor is a friend. Because around that same era in Baltimore, Maryland, scientists identified a very different kind of worm, one that does not build the soil, but tears it apart. That invader is what many gardeners now know as the jumping worm from the genus Amynthus. And this matters because when you use a strong biological attractant like this molasses brew, you are not just calling in life, you are influencing the movement of soil organisms. That means you have to pay attention. Not all worms play the same role, and not all of them belong in the same conversation. The allies we want are the beneficial worms, the ones that help turn compost into fertility and organic matter into structure. Species like the red wiggler or the deep burrowing nightcrawler are valuable partners in any healthy garden. They work with the land, pulling nutrients downward, improving texture, and helping create that dark, crumbly soil every serious grower wants to see. Jumping worms are different. They are aggressive surface feeders, and in many places, they have become a real ecological problem. Instead of slowly building soil, they can strip the top layer of organic matter far too quickly, consuming the leaf litter that protects moisture, feeds microbes, and insulates the surface. What they leave behind often looks like loose coffee grounds, dry, unstable, and far less capable of holding water. Once that protective layer is gone, erosion becomes easier and the whole soil system becomes more fragile. So how do you tell them apart? The first clue is behavior. If you uncover a worm and it suddenly thrashes, flips, and snaps around wildly like a small snake, that is a major warning sign. Beneficial worms are usually calmer and more steady in their movement. Jumping worms are also known for a pale, milky white clitellum that wraps smoothly around the body, while many beneficial worms have a darker, more raised band. If you find jumping worms in your garden, do not move them to compost piles, do not share soil, and do not spread them to other beds. Remove them carefully and keep them from spreading further. We are trying to invite the builders back into the earth, not the destroyers. Because the moment you begin observing the life in your soil this closely, you stop being just someone who grows plants. You become a steward of the ground itself. And that brings us to the deeper meaning of this entire method. Because this $2 molasses mixture is not just a clever garden trick, it is a reminder of something bigger, something many modern growers have been encouraged to forget. Healthy soil is not built by dependency, it is built by understanding. Look at the model of agriculture most people have inherited. First, the soil is stripped, overworked, and exposed. Then we are told the answer is to buy something else. Fertilizer to replace lost fertility, pesticides to fight the imbalance, fungicides to respond to disease, and more products each season to keep a weakened system standing. It becomes a cycle of constant input, constant expense, and constant intervention. And the tragedy is that many growers begin to believe this is normal. But the older way, the ancestral way, was built on a very different idea. It was built on reading the land, understanding decay, respecting microbial life, protecting moisture, and working with natural processes instead of against them. That kind of wisdom does not come in a glossy bag. It does not depend on a brand. And once you learn it, no one can take it away from you. That is why something as simple as sugar, yeast, and molasses matters. These are humble ingredients, but they represent a powerful shift in mindset. Instead of trying to force the soil into submission with harsh inputs, you begin collaborating with a biology that already knows how to build fertility. You stop treating the earth like an empty container and start treating it like a living system that responds when given the right signals. And when the soil truly comes alive, the benefits reach far beyond one good harvest. Living soil holds moisture better during drought, drains more gracefully during heavy rain, buffers plants against stress, and supports stronger, more complete nutrition from the ground up. At that point, you are not just growing vegetables or flowers anymore. You are rebuilding resilience. You are creating humus structure and abundance that can outlast a single season and serve the land for years to come. So here is the truth I hope stays with you after this video ends. There is an entire hidden universe in a single handful of soil. For too long, many people were taught to see that soil as something lifeless that had to be pushed, corrected, and controlled with chemicals. But real fertility does not begin in a factory. It begins underground in the living relationship between microbes, organic matter, moisture, roots, and the creatures that turn death back into life. And today, you have a simple way to begin waking that world up again. With just a few inexpensive ingredients and a little patience, you can call the great builders of the soil back into your garden. You can turn tired ground into a place of movement, structure, and renewal. You can begin transforming your growing space into a place of beauty, nourishment, and living abundance from the soil up. The earth is still listening. It still responds to respect. It still answers when we work with it instead of against it. So the question is simple. Will you try it for yourself? Will you brew the mixture, feed the soil, and see what answers from below? If this journey into the hidden life of the soil has changed the way you look at your garden, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the ancient growing wisdom that modern industry tried to bury. Let's cultivate a more resilient future together. The next secret of the earth will be revealed very soon. Keep your hands in the dirt and keep learning from the land. Happy gardening.